Welcome back. The President of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., met with US President Biden at the White House on Monday, kicking off 4 days of high-level meetings. The visit follows Manila's controversial decision to allow US forces access to more military bases in the country. The two nations also recently carried out annual military exercises, which were the closest yet to the island of Taiwan. The visit also focused on economic issues, as CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King reports.
Well, very interesting visit, more low profile than South Korean President Yoon in his state visit last week, and of that of the Japanese Prime Minister earlier in the term, Kishida, but very much in line with the US trying to shore up its North and Southeast Asian allies. Now, we know this visit comes in the wake of the US getting access to 4 more bases, for example, and those controversial military exercises that happen the furthest north they have done. They happen every year, but these are very, very close to the island of Taiwan, so raise some eyebrows in Beijing and the rest of the region. Some announcements that the US made as this trip unfolded. Some of it's been pledged before, some of it hasn't. An extra $100 million in military aid, also more bases potentially going forward for US military, whether they'll be able to be used all the time, even in the case of conflict, remains a question. C-130s, big transport planes, 3 more of those. Coastal patrol boats, as you know, the Philippines does not have a lot of Coast Guard. The US has been a proxy for that, and given the difficulties with China over the South China Sea, this again will be an eyebrow raiser. Now, when it comes to trade and investment, the US really trying to put another leg on the stool apart from just military aid. Remember the pivot to Asia? Very like that. Trade and investment mission is going to go ahead, looking at innovation, clean energy, critical minerals. The idea is to have more processing of the Philippines' raw materials on the islands of the Philippines. Food security and 5G, trying to compete with China in the region, although that's a bit late in coming. Also, it was revealed by White House officials that they're going to be pushing for a trilateral security discussions between Manila, Tokyo and Washington as well. Let's listen to both the presidents and their priorities.
We're going to announce today that I'm sending a first-of-its-kind presidential trade and investment mission to the Philippines.
We need to find many ways to strengthen our alliances and our partnerships in the face of the new economy that we are facing post-pandemic. Beyond that, there are also the issues, geopolitical issues, that have made the region where the Philippines is possibly, arguably, the most complicated geopolitical situation in the world right now.
Now, we'll see what comes out of this, of course, in the coming months, but you can see the Biden administration, rhetorically not the Trump administration, but really putting their pressure on China when it comes to allies in the South China Sea and on East Asia, militarily more assets, and definitely having taken their eye off the region economically, tried to shore that up, even though they're not part of all these regional trade agreements, even though, let's face it, they were the brains behind some of them. Nathan King, CGTN, just outside the White House.
Well, the Philippine economy is doing surprisingly well as it recovers from the COVID pandemic. The economy grew 7.6% in 2022, the fastest in nearly 50 years. And that positive streak is expected to continue this year, with GDP growth projected to hit between 6 to 7%. Inflation, meanwhile, is forecast for between 5 to 7%. That's higher than what the central bank wants, but inflation has been easing to the slowest growth in 6 months in March. For more insight into the Philippine economy, I'm joined now by Anthony Chan. He is the former chief economist at JP Chase. Thanks so much for joining us on the show there. Now, the Philippines is enjoying a strong rebound. Will that continue?
I think that we will see good growth in 2023. I looked for economic growth somewhere in the 6 to 6.5%. But in 2024, we're going to see a little bit of a slowdown. Again, part of global economic growth slowing down. Some of those remittances that come from overseas will perhaps even slow down in 2024. Keep in mind that the remittances are about 9.3% of Philippine GDP.
How does Marcos's economic and trade policy differ from Duterte's economic approach? Keeping in mind, of course, the debt that Marcos has inherited and COVID-19 recovery efforts.
Well, I'm encouraged by the fact that there is a little bit more willingness to open trade with more countries, perhaps a little friendlier attitude towards the West. All those things are encouraging. And in fact, with the visit to Washington, we're seeing a good illustration of that policy.
But, you know, the US officials say they've stepped up in economic cooperation with the Philippines. It's a dramatic turnaround in relations between the two countries since sort of the past year. Of course, you know, conditions with Duterte deteriorated a lot between the Philippines and the US. What does this mean for China if relations become closer?
Well, it becomes a little bit more complicated because now all of a sudden the balance of power shifts a little bit. But again, in politics, nothing is simple. Things are always complicated. And that's one of the reasons why the Philippines and the United States perhaps will move a little bit closer together and maybe offer some stability to the region.
There was a lot of talk about stability, security, how the relationship can work harder to you know, certainly in US's interest to feel that there is more security on the US side in the Asia Pacific. But what about the economic relationship? What kind of economic deals can we expect to see out of the two countries?
I think that's a very important part of the relationship because what you see in the Philippines is that when foreign companies go into the Philippines and create jobs, those jobs pay much higher, in some instances 50% higher than the local wages. So the more trade, the more you raise the value of jobs, that is going to be a positive development for the standard of living in the Philippines. And I think the President Marcos understands that, and that's why I think he's reaching out to other countries to raise the value of those jobs and therefore raise the standard of living in the Philippines for all the Philippine people. And I think he's doing a great job, and the effort will pay off.
It's a tricky job, though, too, to balance interests of both the US and China. I mean, Marcos sought warm relations from both the United States and China when he first became president last year. But is it possible to have both? What do you think China is watching out for with this relationship?
Well, I think that China will hope at the end to have the Philippines showing a bit of neutrality. Obviously, there'll be a big dance between both countries to see who will have greater sway with the country. But again, at the end of the day, both the security and the economic security, not just military security, will be important to the Philippines, and they will tilt and pivot towards a country that can offer more of both.
All right, Anthony Chan, really appreciate your time. Chief Economist at JP Morgan Chase.